Did you know that the oldest man ever recorded in history was Methuselah, a biblical figure who supposedly lived a staggering 969 years? But what we know about him goes far beyond just the numbers.
Hold on, 969 years? That's almost a millennium. How could anyone live that long? Is it fact, legend, or just a metaphor?
That's a great question. Methuselah's name appears in the book of Genesis, but there's debate about how literally we should interpret those numbers. Some scholars say his longevity was genuine, while others believe those years might have a different cultural or symbolic meaning.
Either way, 969 is quite a number. There's something about it that seems to hold secrets.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today. Who was Methuselah? Why did he live so long? And what's the deeper meaning behind this mysterious biblical figure?
Before we go on, we want to hear from you. Drop your name in the comments and tell us, do you believe Methuselah really lived 969 years? Share a message or question too. We'd love to read and chat with you.
So buckle up, because Methuselah's story is packed with curiosities, controversies, and reflections on life and death. To understand Methuselah, we need to look at his lineage. He was the son of Enoch, the man who walked with God, and according to the Bible, never experienced death because he was taken directly to heaven.
Wait, Enoch didn't die? He was taken alive to heaven? That already sounds extraordinary.
Exactly. Enoch is one of the few biblical figures with that distinction, and his closeness to God seems to have influenced his descendants. Methuselah was the grandson of Kenan and part of a direct line back to Adam.
So Methuselah came from a family marked by unique events. That kind of explains why he's so special.
And there's another fascinating detail. Methuselah was Noah's grandfather, the man who built the ark and survived the flood. The connection between them is no coincidence.
It makes you wonder, did Methuselah live so long because he had a greater purpose to fulfill?
Methuselah lived in what's called the antediluvian era, meaning before the Great Flood. The Bible describes this period as a time of widespread corruption and violence on earth.
And he spent nearly 1,000 years in that chaotic world. That must have been quite a challenging life.
Indeed. The extreme longevity of people back then is one of the Bible's biggest mysteries. Adam lived 930 years and Noah lived 950. It suggests that life expectancy was much higher before the flood.
So why did that change after the flood? Did something happen on Earth, like a climate shift or something else, that reduced human lifespans?
That's one theory. Some theologians believe Earth's environment was drastically altered, perhaps due to climate changes or other factors. Others think it was a divine decision to limit human corruption.
So Methuselah can be seen as a landmark figure of an era that ended with the flood.
Methuselah's name is also intriguing. In Hebrew, it can be translated as man of the spear, or when he dies, it will come.
Wait, when he dies, it will come. What does that mean?
That interpretation is connected to the flood. According to biblical timelines, Methuselah died the same year the flood began. Some scholars see his name as a prophecy.
So his death marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. That adds an even more symbolic dimension to his life.
Exactly. Methuselah isn't just a symbol of longevity, he's also a sign of both judgment and mercy in the biblical narrative. Despite his long life, the Bible doesn't share many details about Methuselah's deeds, but his remarkable lifespan alone turned him into a legend, a symbol of patience, resilience, and mystery.
And maybe that's what makes him so fascinating. It's not about his actions, but rather what he represents that keeps sparking debates and discussions.
Plus, Methuselah's connection to Noah reminds us of how important our lineage and future generations are. He's part of a family tree that led to the salvation of a lost world.
And it makes you wonder, how do our lives affect those who come after us? Even without big achievements, are we leaving a legacy behind?
Methuselah's story reminds us that every life has a purpose, even if it's not immediately obvious at first glance. Methuselah wasn't the only biblical figure to live for centuries. In the antediluvian era, it was quite common for people to reach astonishing ages, like Adam, who lived 930 years, and Noah, who lived 950.
Wait, does that mean living for hundreds of years was actually normal back then? Why would that happen?
There are several theories. Some scholars believe that before the flood, Earth's environment was more conducive to human life. fewer diseases, a more stable climate, and, according to the Bible, a kind of water canopy that shielded the earth from harmful radiation.
That's interesting, and it would explain why, after the flood, people's lifespans dropped drastically.
Exactly. Additionally, some interpret this great longevity as a special divine blessing for the early patriarchs who played a key role in establishing humanity.
So Methuselah and his generation were like bridges between the original creation and the post-flood world. They carried the history and teachings of an era that would never return.
Methuselah is directly linked to the most catastrophic event in biblical history, the flood. He was the grandfather of Noah, the man chosen by God to build the ark and preserve life on earth.
And you mentioned earlier that Methuselah died in the same year the flood happened. Is that really true?
Yes. Based on the biblical genealogies, he passed away the very year the flood began. That doesn't seem like a coincidence, especially when you consider the meaning of his name. When he dies, it will come.
That's so symbolic. It's almost as if his life itself was a signal that something monumental was about to happen.
Exactly. Many theologians believe Methuselah's long life reflects God's patience, giving humanity nearly 1,000 years to repent before judgment came.
That really changes the way we see his longevity. It wasn't just that he lived a very long time. He represented God's mercy.
Methuselah wasn't just a long-lived man. He was also a central figure in a lineage that shaped humanity's future. He was the father of Lamech and the grandfather of Noah.
And Noah, of course, is a key biblical figure. But what about Lamech? What do we know about him?
Lamech is known for what he said regarding Noah. He declared that his son would bring relief from the suffering caused by the curse on the earth, which shows he believed Noah had a special calling.
So, Methuselah wasn't just a symbol of longevity. He was part of a prophetic lineage that led to a renewal of humanity.
Exactly. And his link to Noah highlights that he lived during a crucial moment when humanity's fate hung in the balance. Like many biblical figures, Methuselah's story sparks controversies. Some question the literal accuracy of his 969 years, while others debate his role in God's plan.
Regarding his age, there are those who say the numbers could be symbolic, right?
Yes. Some theories suggest these numbers might be symbolic, or that they could even refer to lunar cycles instead of solar years, which would make his actual age closer to what we'd consider plausible today.
But that doesn't make him any less significant, does it? Even if the numbers are symbolic, Methuselah's story still carries enormous cultural and spiritual weight.
Exactly. Whether taken literally or symbolically, Methuselah's longevity represents divine patience, purpose, and the power of spiritual lineage. Beyond his extraordinary age, Methuselah's spiritual significance is often overlooked. He was a living witness across many generations, a keeper of the past's teachings and stories.
And maybe that's what truly makes him stand out. He was like a bridge between the world as God created it and the world that would face the flood.
Exactly. There's something profoundly moving about the idea that, even after living for centuries, he still played a part in a greater plan. His life wasn't just long, it was meaningful.
It leads us to wonder, are we living our lives with the same sense of purpose? Are we fulfilling the roles we've been given?
That's one of the major lessons Methuselah leaves us. It's not just about how long we live, but how we use the time we have. Methuselah's story still resonates in our modern world, where we're constantly searching for ways to extend and improve our lives. He reminds us that longevity alone isn't enough. We need purpose.
Maybe that's why he remains so relevant. He's not just a historical oddity. He's a symbol of patience, faith, and a connection to something greater than ourselves.
Exactly. And his story challenges us to think about our own lives. Are we living with intention? Are we leaving a meaningful legacy?
And perhaps most importantly, are we acknowledging the value of the generations that came before us and the ones that will come after us?
Those are the questions Methuselah's story poses. And maybe as we seek to answer them, we'll discover our own sense of purpose. Methuselah lived in a world very different from ours, known as the antediluvian period. It was a time when people lived for hundreds of years. The earth was filled with giants called the Nephilim, and corruption seemed to know no bounds.
Giants? You mean the Nephilim mentioned in Genesis? They're referred to as the mighty men of old. I've always found that part mysterious.
Exactly. The Nephilim are one of the biggest curiosities of that era. Some believe they resulted from the union of the sons of God and the daughters of men, but the exact meaning is still debated today.
So Methuselah lived in a time that feels like something out of an epic tale, a mix of legends, spirituality, and chaos.
Yes, and that context makes his life even more fascinating. He was part of a sacred lineage, surrounded by a world that was drifting further and further away from God. Methuselah's father, Enoch, is a central figure in the Bible. He's described as someone who walked with God and was taken without experiencing death.
That always impressed me. How could someone walk with God so intimately that he was taken straight to heaven? That must have been an enormous inspiration for Methuselah.
No doubt. Enoch is an example of faith and obedience, and that definitely shaped Methuselah's life. He wasn't just a man who lived a long time, he was part of a lineage of people closely connected to God.
So, besides the responsibility of living in such a complex world, Methuselah also carried the weight of a spiritual legacy. That's a heavy burden for anyone.
Absolutely, and it makes it all the more significant that he lived up until the year of the flood, as though his life marked the transition between the old world and the new. The age of 969 years is one of the most striking aspects of Methuselah's story. It's the highest number recorded in the Bible and continues to intrigue scholars and believers.
But are those numbers literal, or is there something deeper behind it?
That's a great question. Some scholars believe the numbers could carry symbolic meaning, representing cycles or eras rather than literal years. Others argue that extreme longevity was a literal characteristic of the antediluvian period.
Either way, 969 years is a number that carries weight. It seems to convey the idea of patience, continuity, and purpose.
Exactly. It's as if Methuselah's long life was a metaphor for God's patience with humanity, giving them ample time to repent before judgment. Methuselah was Noah's grandfather, the man chosen by God to preserve life during the flood. That family connection is no coincidence. It underscores Methuselah's central role in the biblical narrative.
That means Methuselah likely saw Noah grow up, heard about the ark's construction, and witnessed the increasing corruption around him.
Yes, and it's possible he served as a mentor to Noah. After all, with nearly 1,000 years of experience, he would have had a lot of wisdom to share.
And it's interesting to think that while most people ignored Noah's warnings, Methuselah was there, living right up until the moment the flood was about to happen.
That makes his death even more significant. It's like he was the final link to an era that ended when the floodwaters came. During his lifetime, Methuselah saw the world change drastically. He witnessed humanity's expansion, the rise of corruption, and ultimately the preparation for divine judgment.
Do you think he tried to influence the people around him? Maybe warn them about the path they were on?
It's possible. Although the Bible doesn't give us details about his actions, his connection to Enoch and Noah suggests he had a strong spiritual awareness.
That's fascinating. He wasn't just a man who lived a very long time. He was someone who saw the best and worst of humanity.
Exactly. And his life challenges us to think about how we use our time and how we impact those around us. The flood is one of the most debated events in the Bible among both theologians and scientists, and Methuselah's connection to it only adds to the controversies.
Do you think the flood was literal, as described in the Bible, or more symbolic, representing a spiritual judgment?
It's a complex question. Some traditions view the flood as a global event, while others interpret it as regional or metaphorical, symbolizing a renewal of humanity.
Then Methuselah would be a symbol of transition. He lived right up to the brink of that event, as if his life were a final warning.
Exactly. And that reinforces the importance of his story, not just as an individual, but as part of something much larger. In the end, Methuselah's life challenges us to think about the true meaning of longevity. It's not just about living a long time, but living with purpose.
And maybe that's why his story still resonates so strongly today. He reminds us that every day we have is an opportunity to make a difference.
Exactly. Methuselah lived almost 1,000 years, but his impact goes far beyond the numbers. He teaches us about patience, faith, and the power of a life connected to God.
And ultimately, it doesn't matter how much time we have, but what we do with it. That's Methuselah's real lesson.
Methuselah lived during an era deeply defined by a complex spiritual climate. The antediluvian world was a mixture of devotion and rebellion. Some walked faithfully with God like Enoch, while others gave themselves over to corruption and violence.
And Methuselah. Where did he fit into that picture? Did he follow in Enoch's footsteps? Or was he just a witness to the chaos?
From what we know, it seems he carried the spiritual influence of his father, Enoch. His extraordinarily long life and his role in Noah's lineage suggest he was a crucial link between the generations that walked with God and those that went astray.
That's remarkable. He lived in a world that was falling apart, yet his story suggests he was part of the spiritual resistance, someone who kept the faith alive.
Exactly, and that makes us think, how do we keep our faith when everything around us is in turmoil? Methuselah challenges us to be a point of light, even when all seems dark. As we've mentioned, Methuselah's name can be interpreted to mean, when he dies, it will come. But there's an even deeper layer to that meaning.
Do you think his name was a prophecy, like his entire life pointed toward the flood?
That's exactly it. Methuselah's name seems to encapsulate a divine message. His extreme longevity wasn't just impressive, it was a warning. His death marked the beginning of the flood, God's judgment on humanity.
That adds a huge weight to his story. It's not just about living a long time, but about serving as a milestone in God's relationship with humankind.
Exactly. Methuselah's life symbolizes God's patience and mercy, while his death marks the shift toward judgment and renewal. The antediluvian era was increasingly marked by corruption and wickedness. God decided to send the flood as a way to cleanse the earth, but he gave humanity centuries to repent.
So Methuselah was like a walking countdown, wasn't he? Each additional year of his life was another chance for people to change.
Precisely. Methuselah's long life was no coincidence. It reflects God's patience, waiting until the very last moment before bringing the flood.
It makes me wonder, how are we using the time we have? Are we taking advantage of our opportunities to change and grow?
That's one of the deepest lessons from Methuselah. It's not just about living a long life, but about living meaningfully, treating each day like a gift. Interestingly, even though he lived so long and was connected to major events, the Bible doesn't give us many details about Methuselah's life. He only appears in genealogies and in a record of how many years he lived.
Why do you think that is? Why doesn't the Bible say more?
Maybe because Methuselah's significance isn't about his actions, but about what he represents. He's a symbol of continuity, of God's patience, and of the transition between different eras.
So maybe the silence surrounding him is intentional. It's like he's there to make us think, rather than to hand us all the answers.
Exactly. Sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that challenge us to seek meaning on our own. As Noah's grandfather, Methuselah played a key role in preserving humanity's lineage. Noah was chosen by God to build the ark and save creation from the flood.
Do you think Methuselah knew about Noah's calling? Could he have seen the ark being built and realized what was coming?
It's very possible. Given his advanced age, he would have witnessed much of Noah's life and maybe even helped shape his spiritual upbringing.
That makes Methuselah more than just a bystander. He was a link between generations, someone who helped pave the way for humanity's renewal.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that our actions today can have a huge impact on future generations, even if we don't see it right away. Above all, Methuselah's life is a story of purpose. He isn't remembered for great deeds or speeches, but for the quiet weight of his presence in the biblical narrative.
Maybe that's what makes him so special. He reminds us that we don't have to be famous by worldly standards to have meaning. Every life has its own unique purpose.
Exactly. His story challenges us to live with intention, to make the most of our time, and to leave behind a legacy that resonates with future generations.
Methuselah might have been the oldest man in the Bible, but his true legacy is timeless. He reminds us that each and every day is an opportunity to make a difference.
The final year of Methuselah's life was a pivotal moment in biblical history. According to calculations based on genealogies, he passed away in the very same year the flood began, marking the end of an era of divine patience.
Can you imagine how significant that must have been? It's as if his life was a countdown clock, ticking away the moments until judgment.
Exactly. The silence surrounding Methuselah's death in the biblical account speaks volumes, just as powerful as his 969 years on earth. He departed just before the world was changed forever.
It makes you wonder, did he know his death was the final warning? Or did he pass away with no idea of what was about to unfold?
Maybe he knew, maybe he didn't, but the symbolism of his life and death points to God's patience, which lasted right up until the very moment before the flood. Methuselah's link to the flood goes beyond mere symbolism. His passing represents the close of one age, a defining line between the old world and the new world that would emerge after judgment.
That gives his story even more weight. He witnessed generations who walked closely with God, as well as those who strayed completely away.
Yes, he saw the world transform, watched corruption grow, and ultimately witnessed his lineage, through Noah, become an instrument of redemption.
So he wasn't just a passive figure. Even though he was often silent, his life held deep meaning and made a powerful impact.
Exactly. Methuselah reminds us that even in dark times, there are those who remain faithful, and their influence can span generations. People often view Methuselah's remarkably long life as a reflection of God's patience. Almost 1,000 years were given to humanity to repent before the flood came.
It shows how boundless God's mercy is. He waited as long as possible, offering chance after chance.
And Methuselah, with his extended lifespan, represents that waiting period. He was a living reminder that time was running out.
It's interesting to think about that today. Are we making the most of the time we have, or are we wasting the opportunities in front of us?
That's a question Methuselah's story forces us to consider. It's not about how long we live, but how we use the moments we're given. As Noah's grandfather, Methuselah played a crucial role in preparing the next generation for the massive challenge to come, the flood.
It's fascinating. While the world around them was spiraling into corruption, he was part of a lineage destined to restore humanity.
Yes, and his quiet presence must have influenced Noah. He carried nearly 1,000 years' worth of wisdom and experience.
It makes you think about the impact we have on future generations. Are we equipping those who follow us to face their own challenges?
That's one of the profound lessons from Methuselah. Our legacy isn't just about what we do, it's about how we shape others. God's patience is a central theme in Methuselah's story. He lived so long because God was waiting for humanity to repent and return to him.
That shows how merciful yet just God is. He gives us time, but judgment inevitably arrives.
Exactly. Methuselah's lifetime was like a grace period, reminding everyone that each new day was a fresh opportunity.
Maybe that's the biggest lesson here. No matter what we face, we always have a chance to change course and do what's right.
Yes, Methuselah's story challenges us to live with that awareness, to see each day as both a gift and a responsibility. Methuselah's story isn't just about the oldest person in the Bible, it's about patience, purpose, and the quiet impact we can have on the world around us.
He reminds us that even if our lives seem ordinary, they can carry deep significance. Every day we live is a chance to make a difference.
His life challenges us to think about how we spend our time. Are we living with intention? Are we leaving a legacy that will resonate with future generations?
If you enjoyed exploring Methuselah's story, we have even more incredible content about biblical figures and the lessons they offer us today.
So don't wait. Like this video, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our upcoming stories.
And share it with someone who you think needs to hear this message. Let's learn, reflect, and grow together.